Alright, so this is my explanation of the meals app that I've created. So looking at the first page, this is the categories of all the different food. This just shows all the different tabs you can click on that shows all the different food. You can actually hold and look through all these different ones, and you can actually hold the screen to swipe through to see them all. At the bottom, we have a categories and a favorites tab. And if you're able to click onto the favorites, you can see that there's nothing there because we haven't added any there yet. But if we go over to the top, we have a little bar at the top with triple bars for pull up a little menu on the side that allows you to choose between meals and filters. And when you go to these filters, it actually allows you to choose your certain meals based on your certain dietary preferences. So if we were to click on lactose free, for example, it would exclude all the meal. It'll include only meals that are lactose free. So if we go back, hit the back arrow and go back to our categories, and go to hamburgers, for example, you can see that the hamburgers is lactose free, so that one's still going to be available. And if we click on that, we can see, as it was in the previous things, it'll show the ingredients and the steps. But when we actually click the star, it'll actually add the meal to its favorites tab. So if we go back, we go to the favorites tab, you can see that the hamburger has been added to the favorites page. And you could actually go in there and actually hit the star again, and it would automatically remove the meal as it says on the bottom, and it updates on the actual favorites tab. And you can click the triple buttons up top to go back to the meals, and it'll bring you right over here, and it can bring you over to the filters. You can turn that off, and then you can get all the different types of foods. And now, actually looking at the code, we have the main.dart file. This is basically just where I run all of the pretty basic functions, being able to actually call everything in the app. Here we will set the theme data of everything, as well as actually using a provider scope to actually call in for the actual run app to be able to use the actual functions inside the meals app. I had to extend for a stateless widget, and here where I had to use for set a constant for the tab screen, and the tabs are just being able to actually use that later on, which I will explain later. Here in the favorites provider.dart, this was using for the actual favorites page. Right here we have the state notifier and list meal, which you actually had to import using the RiverPod package that Flutter provides. Here we had to use a boolean to actually set if the meal's favorite actually contains the meal that you've chosen, and if it includes the ID of the meal, which just be the address basically of what the actual meal is that you're calling. And if it does not equal that, then it returns false, so it wouldn't actually put it in the favorite. Otherwise, it would actually return that state of the meal and actually return true, giving you that meal in the favorites section. And here we have final meals, favorite meals provider, which is a state notifier allowing you to actually put, because the meals will be in a list, using it as a reference, and we actually returning the notification to actually tell you that a meal has been added to your favorite section. Moving on to the filters provider, this was actually all the different filters that we use to separate all the different dietary restrictions. We had to set the enum for a filter for gluten, lactose, vegetarian, and vegan. Here we actually use the filters notifier extending into the map again using the filter and the boolean variable to actually say true or false whether or not certain dietary restriction was actually clicked. And as it starts out, the app will automatically set all the filters to false, so that way none of the foods are actually restricted. And this is where you use set filter to actually set it to actually choose the state of the chosen filter, whichever one is actually clicked on. And here you use state and the triple dots to actually use for the state to show that it was inactive. Scrolling down, we have the filters provider using a final, and this is where you actually use again the state notifier provider to actually look through the map and use that boolean variable. Right here is where, right below, you have the returned meals, where if the action filter is gluten free with the exclamation marks, using that in the beginning and the end to actually show if it is or is not actually clicked and gluten free, then it will return false. And when it doesn't, it would actually return true, and this would update to the list. Looking at the categories.dart function, this is all the different categories that were being used throughout the actual app. This is where you'd go to actually check to make sure everything was being implemented inside the categories. Here we use init state, which actually just initializes in the first function of all the widgets. So this is where anything that would happen in the beginning, before any of the build context would be used, that's what the init state would do. This is for the animation controller, actually, being able to use VSync, using the duration, setting it to about 300 milliseconds, and setting the bounds so that it doesn't go over or out of the actual app container. But below, you actually have the first select categories using the filtered meals as well for the available meals. That way, when it filters out, it actually only shows the available meals that are being there. Going down, we have the navigator context to actually find for the material page route, being able to set the actual category title as well as the meals that are being filtered in and out based off the restrictions. And here we actually have the widget build for the context. This is just for the animation, being able to actually slide through using the child aspect ratio, the spacing, again, just making sure that everything actually fits inside of the actual app. And if you scroll a bit down here, we have the builder for the context child for the slide transition to actually be able to slide through. This was all using the curved animation as well as setting the parent as animation controller. And the curve basically was just used as a collection of animated curves that were being used. Going to the meal providers.dart, this was basically just used for the dummy meals to be able to just make sure that the meals provider actually had something to actually return for the dummy meals. And this is again using the RiverPod package that Flutter gives you. Here we have the category grid item.dart file. I'm going to go through using the inkwell. Again, this was just being able to use for the actual grid items that were being shown for each category. This is just setting what the boxes are going to look like. It's circular, setting the edge into border radius to 16, making it a bit opaque so you can actually see through it with the wording, and going through with all the different backgrounds. In the meal item.dart file, this was all the different items that you could able to be seen through the meals. Then again, this is using a string, being able to actually show for the uppercase, for the lowercase, for the actual names of them, as well as the affordability text, being able to show for the complexities and the affordability, how hard it was to make, how cheap or expensive it is. Going through, we actually have using a hero right side inside of this child, which was basically used to actually be able to make sure that the child parameters would not be heroless, be able to use a fade in image. Basically, every time the picture was clicked on, it would fade into the screen. Again, this was for the position to actually make sure that everything was set properly, making sure that it wasn't actually off-centered inside the actual app. This was actually used for this row, was used for the actual duration to actually show the minute, and this is for use a size box for the width, as well as the meal item trait to actually show for the attach for the affordability and the complexity. Moving over to the tabs.dart file, this was something that was added in, which again had to use the filters provider as well as the RiverPod function. This is where we use k initial filters to actually filter out for the different dietary restrictions that were being used, as I showed earlier before. And we actually had to change some of the widgets from being stateful or stateless widgets to actually consumer stateful widgets to actually be able to use these different filters that were going to be used. So again, we had to use consumer state instead of just being a state widget. This would actually become consumer state that would actually work with these actual initial filters. And here we basically had to go through and actually redesign some of the functions in this app so that the filters were able to be used. So right here we use the material page route for the filter screen and how to make it const. And going through, we actually had for the active title would be categories, and if the selected page index was 1, then it would make sure to watch which actual thing you were looking at to make sure the active page was set to meal screen, which would be your favorite meals, and the active page would switch over to your favorites instead of just being in the category screen. Here we use a scaffold to actually look through on tab for the bottom navigation bar. That way, when you actually clicked on the categories or the favorites button on the bottom, it would actually send you to the correct page, as well as just making it more of a splash screen for that. Here in the filters.dart file, this was been used for the actual filters. This was basically used for the actual writing of the filters, where it would say gluten-free, for example, and it would say right underneath it, only include gluten-free meals. Basically, we'd use constant for text, and we put your filters, and we basically stuck it inside of a column widget and set each of the text to whatever they needed to be, as well as making sure that telling Flutter that the title would be large using the exclamation point at the end. And we basically copied that throughout for each of the different filters. So for all 4 filters, it was all basically the same code, just changed up a little bit for each of their different names. Here we have the main drawer.dart. Going here through here, we actually have for the onSelect screen. Here in the actual build, in the actual widget build, we use this for the drawer header, as well to actually set the padding and the insets for 20, using the decoration, making it a bit opaque so that you could actually see through it a little bit. And going through that, we actually had the in the actual like sidebar, basically where you would see it if you click the triple buttons at the top, where you'd be able to see this text of cooking up. This is where that was made. This drawer file basically allowed you to see the meals, the little meals function that you would see. You click on that to actually bring you to meals, as well as be able to see the filters. Those buttons basically were allowed for you to, when on tap, it would allow you to actually switch to the screen that you click on. So if you clicked on filters, it would send you to the filter screen. If you clicked on meals, it would send you back to the categories, which shows all the different meals that you could get. Now looking at the meal item trait.dart file, this was for actually all the different items and what they would be doing for the traits. This is where we left it as a stateless widget. This basically just set it up and set the colors for what it would be like, as well as making it a final for icons for the icon data and for the strings for each of the names. And this was just for the dummy.dart data. This dummy data actually was used in some aspects of the code, but we actually took it out to be able to fill in with the actual meals that we would be able to be using. And here in the meals.dart file, this was basically used making sure that if the favorites tab was actually empty, then it would actually show a text that showed nothing here, or would show you a different category. And as long as it wasn't empty, then it would actually show the selected meal that was being chosen. And that's the final thing. Here is all of these sections on Udemy to actually show that all of the sections were covered. So starting up in section 8, going all through section 9, and finishing up in section 10 for the animations. And that is everything for the Meals app.